Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're just going to give it another couple seconds to make sure everyone's come in from the waiting room, and then we'll get started. Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to Best Practices Towards Transfer Retention. I would like to introduce your presenter, Dr. Nancy Komada, Director of Student Transitions at St. Joseph's University. Nancy has served in 4 different roles while at St. Joseph's University and has previously worked at both Temple and Rosemont. In her current position at St. Joe's, Nancy works with transfer students, first-generation college students, commuting students, and first-year experience. We have allotted time for questions after the presentation. However, Nancy would like this to be an interactive session, so she encourages you to please ask questions throughout the presentation. Right before we get started, I'm going to turn it over to Nancy, but we're going to go around and have everyone introduce themselves. You will notice that you are on mute, so when you are introducing yourself, please unmute yourself. And if you have any questions throughout the presentation, make sure you unmute yourself. Enjoy, Nancy.
Thank you so much. I would just like to know who's all in the group here. So I'd just start by saying, my name is Nancy Komada, as you just heard. Could we introduce each other?
Sure, let's start with the TAAC account, folks, because
yeah, we'll start with the TAAC account. Go ahead, Karina.
My name is Karina Dreher, and I represent Widener University.
Hi, everyone. I'm Catherine Oberholzer, and I represent Westchester University.
I'm Melissa Preston, and I represent Holy Family University.
And I'm Danny Liu, and I represent Immaculata University.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jen Rieger Murphy, and I'm with Thomas Jefferson University.
I'm Thomas O'Connor. I work at Delaware Valley University.
Hi, I'm Laura Mangano. I'm also part of TAAC, and I am with Delaware County Community College.
Nice to meet you. Anyone else? Well, we have a lot of different institutions here represented. That's great news. So thank you so much for coming to this session. And I'm certainly no expert on this. It's just something that's one of my passions with getting students who are at risk for attrition, getting those students connected well to our university so that they end up graduating with their degree. So I think next slide, please. I'm really happy to have people actually agree, disagree, or chime in with a different idea, because I think one of the things that we miss most from the COVID time is that we don't get to see one another and share these informal conversations, and that's how I get little tips and tricks along the way. So these are my cohorts. We cohort students here at St. Joseph's University. I think a lot of schools do that now. And then you're sort of their coach. I say to students, especially right now. So, who knows who Doc Rivers is, right? And then they say, the coach of the Sixers. And then I say, and that's who I am. I'm your coach. So that's kind of like the introduction. And then the support comes along the way. So one of my populations is transfer students, as we discussed. First generation college students is another of the populations, commuting students, and then I'm responsible for the first year experience, which works with FYS, which is first year seminar, with outside the classroom experiences that are relevant to the coursework. So these are my 4 big things. And then, we all have that and other duties as responsible, and, there's many things under that, right? Okay, next slide, please. So this is a little bit of the overview, that I envision. How is this transfer population different from other new students? What can we do to give them an early and good beginning? And then transfer orientation, as we see it here at St. Joseph's, is a multi-event and a process. And so I'll go through that on the slides. So again, what I found in the research and what I found myself, that's what I put on this slide. are that transfer students are a different kind of a population, of course, in the sense that they are new students to our campuses, so they are not familiar with our culture, maybe free period and things like that that are specific to our institution, yet they're not freshmen. So they're not first time to campus at all, right? So they've been here, they've been at a school before, and they certainly don't want to ever be called freshmen, even though sometimes they are by credits. They're certainly anxious. They many times feel like they're the only person that is in this boat, because everybody else who's a junior seems to have their act together. They're certainly experiencing change, and they need our logistics. They need how things work, and they certainly want to meet others, or at least we want them to meet others. That's one of the things I'll get into a little bit later, that the students that I work with that are transfer leaders, we call them transfer mentors. That's something I kind of drill into them, into their heads at training, that, you know, there may be a student at a table sitting by him or herself. That's the kind of, we don't want that to be, right? So we need to include them somehow, maybe if it means you go over to that table and sit with them, not necessarily pull them into a bigger group. And students are great about that I work with, but I just remind them of that, because sometimes they can get chatty and forget that there's a person or two on the periphery. Any other comments about transfer students that you found? Just one last thing that I would say about that is that sometimes I find that our transfer students are older as well. Sometimes they're veterans, especially, interestingly enough, in January. Our students in January, even we do a January orientation and an August one for our transfer students. And our January orientation includes any new freshmen. So basically, my orientation program is the only game in town in January. What's interesting about that is that I prepare for these 6 or 8 freshmen, you know, that we have on that list. And many times they end up being 28 or 29 years old, which is real different than our first year students, of course. And then you find that they had military background or something like that. I must say, this January, of course, that was a little bit different, because we had people that deferred a semester. So we did have a fair number of brand new freshmen in the spring. Okay, so I'm sorry, if you could go back one slide. If I can ask folks, what have you found institutionally that helps the adjustment? And what I mean by that is, like, so what have you done? Have you done orientation, or have you done other things that helps these transfer new students with the adjustment?
Nancy, I have a question. I'm Karina from Widener. So as far as adjustment, you know, orientation, definitely. But I think there's been, I know for Widener, but for other institutions, I know there's always the question, do you have a first year seminar for transfer students? Given that they already have that college experience, then maybe they already have been through a freshman seminar. And what is your take on the freshman seminar for, you know, the introductory seminar for transfer students?
Off the top of my head, and this is just, you know, how I feel with the students that I work with, so it's pretty limited, is that many times they seem to me to be pretty utilitarian. You know, they're working, sometimes they're putting themselves through school. And so if it costs more, or it's not a credit bearing piece, I don't know that we would have many students 2-3 times down the, you know, sessions. I'm thinking that, I'm thinking of a couple of students that I talked to that are taking summer classes so they could finish up in December, and I don't think that would be met well, again, with the students that I work with, because we go to all kinds of extremes to get them involved, and open up opportunities for them to do different things, whether it's get a tutor, be a tutor, you know, things like that, to be a part of community service. Another thing that I find is that our transfer students are really, like, they come here looking for Greek life. I'm not sure that's a good thing or bad, honestly, but they're very into, like, rushing a sorority or fraternity. So much so that they're concerned that we have a 1 semester deferment for Greek rushing. So you can't be a brand new freshman and rush a fraternity or sorority. And so they want their credits to show up so that they can show what their GPA is, and that they can rush, you know, a fraternity or sorority, that they're not a freshman, even though they're a brand new student. Does that help? Again, that's just from my perspective. Anybody else have any
I can jump in. Karina, to address your question, just from Westchester, we do require we call it FYE, first year experience. We do have one that is adjusted for transfer students, and if they have less than 24 college credits, we do encourage them to enroll in that course. And we do obviously make exceptions. We don't force them to take it as a transfer student, but if they have less than 24 credits, we highly encourage them to do so. And yes, Westchester does orientation both for incoming spring and incoming fall transfer students. So we have transfer specific orientation for students.
So let me ask you, is that transfer experience class, is that credit bearing?
I believe it's 1 credit.
Okay, so they do get a credit for it though. And then do you find that many students take it? Like, do you have an idea of a number or a percentage?
I don't, because it's new. It's new. It's really new to Westchester overall, even for our first years within the last 2 years.
Okay.
It's new, and I think transfers only just started being asked to take it within the last year.
I see. Okay, thank you. Anyone else before we move on? Okay, we could go to the next slide. So these are the things that I found that's helped. Well, actually, I should say St. Joseph's University, because it's certainly beyond me. These are the 6 things, and I'll go into them with a little bit more detail, but I just wanted to list them all up there. So each of the next slides has one of these on it. So we could go to the next slide. So let me see, I have my screen too far over. I can't really even say it. Okay. So early on at this time of the year, actually maybe a month ago, beginning a month ago, I start to partner with admissions on the transfer class that's coming in, as well as my other cohorts. And so we can pull a report of which students were admitted and which students accepted our admission. And so we can communicate with these students early on, right? So there's a 3-person transfer admissions team that I work with, and I ask them to be included we have transfer days, transfer admission days, and Zoom sessions now with students and parents we've been having. So I ask them, because we're in a different division, it's not a natural thing to be invited. I'm in the student life division, and that's not where admissions is. So I make sure that I reach out to them and ask them that I participate in that. And then transfer orientation, as I said, is a multi-process event, and we include parents in that too. I'll talk about that a little bit later. And then when we, they sort of, I'm sure all of you have the same thing, where once a student has deposited, they become, a registered student with an ID and all of that, and a student number. So then they become like our students at that point, the student success team, and they're not so much with admissions, but I keep the admissions counselors a part of orientation and a part moving forward of the transfer credits and that kind of thing, so that we have a team approach. Because obviously many of you are in those positions, and they have a different relationship with the families and are usually more knowledgeable than I am about the individual student. My thing with the cohorts is always, how many of us hear people say, we just went through graduation this past Saturday. And how many people say to you at home in your neighborhood, oh, I guess you're done work for the summer. It's like, I'm more busy now than I am in September. I really am. And then it starts up really heavy duty again in October with the student success piece for students that are maybe slacking a little bit. But the earlier you can connect with students, I think the better, as I'm sure we all feel that way. And so I start to include the new cohort in things that we do. So I name them That's a little bit of a challenge with the retention in terms of, you know, how many students have how much time to go. So I just named them as a Google group, transfers F21, and then I can communicate with them and I keep adding to that group. So I've found that doing that for each of my cohorts has been incredibly helpful to keep them aware of things that are happening, because I find that with the cohorts that I mentioned, many of the same students are often in more than one of those cohorts. Like first generation college students are often commuters. Commuters are often first gen students. And then some of those are transfers. So in an effort to keep them involved and keep them connected, I reach out to them regularly. And people at the university know that. So they'll say things like, can you send this to the transfer students? And then I'll send that out. Like, for example, community service fair. We have a community service fair with, you know, weekly service, semester service, summer service, and it's a little fair outside with tables. They'll ask me if I'll send that to the transfer students, or Greek Life writes to me and asks me to include the transfer students in some of these things. Is there any more to this slide? Did this not come over so well? Oh, there it is. Okay, because I'm looking at my paper here and I'm thinking, I think there's, okay, so we created, one of the things that I feel really good about is transfer mentors. The transfer students that do well here, and I want to say that that's a lot of them, they typically become very passionate about the transfer experience, and they actually reach out to me and say, can I be a transfer mentor? So we have this transfer mentor program that students get interviewed with myself and one or two of the current transfer mentors. We bring the students back for training, and then they are the students that are kind of like the orientation leaders, if you will, the transfer leaders that goes beyond, as I said, orientation. So one of the things that came up in the interviews that they had was that they would have liked to have been connected to new transfer students sooner than orientation. So I'm curious, please interrupt me if anybody has ways to do this or if you've been doing this, but when you think about it, which I did not before, it makes a lot of sense, right? It's for the reasons that I just said. They're not freshmen, but they're not necessarily connected with other students here. And so they need a roommate. So a lot of times they don't feel comfortable going in with other sophomores or other juniors. They would rather go in with other new transfer students, or at least one or two, so that there's somebody who has the same experience. So we did that this year. I reached out to the students in Cognos that have been admitted, and we started a Google group, and I have a work study who's actually all of those populations that I just mentioned, which is fabulous. I'm actually hiring now by cohort, because that has been, I just graduated a student that worked with me for 4 years and was actually in my previous role with me working with adult and graduate students. And she was a fantastic student, but believe it or not, she didn't fit in any of those populations. And it was a little bit of a disconnect with her when I asked her to do something. Like the student that works with me now is so passionate about, she thinks before I do of an idea of how we can meet this goal. So I think that from now on, I will always hire people that are work study that are at least in one of those cohorts. That's been very helpful. So anyway, she also created a Facebook page that's really geared towards the new incoming transfers, but also certainly other transfers can be a part of that. But I'm looking on there and it does say, like, I'm looking for a roommate and that kind of thing. So I'm hopefully that's helping, and they might know a person or two before they come to orientation. And for me, again, I reach out and introduce myself, and then I continue to write to them. Even like, for example, we had, unfortunately with the COVID, we ended up both of our transfer orientations, fall and spring, were both Zoom, and actually pivoted at the last minute. We were so hopeful that we were going to be able to have this small group on campus. We even used the idea of like, this is why these kids are transferring here in the first place, because they didn't have a good experience virtually. So that's why and everybody said, you're right, we're going to have this on campus. And then at the last minute, we had to go online. So it was very disappointing. So I continued to reach out to those students maybe once a month to say, well, guys, we're 4 weeks in. How are you feeling? What questions do you have? And the woman that I mentioned that I hired, her name is Samantha. And she wants me to do this. I certainly have her approval, but I say, and if you'd rather talk to a transfer who's a transfer mentor, you can reach out to Sam. So I have her email on all the things that I reach out to them about, so that I find, I don't know about you all, but I find that the transfer mentors connect 1,000 times better than the rest of us to these transfers. They listen so much to the transfer mentors, and that kind of guides what I do with them, which then gives the transfer mentors lots of opportunity for leadership. And I spend a lot of time with them. And anyway, so that's further along. But we also have early arrival programs, which begin like maybe Tuesday, Wednesday before classes begin, and students live here for those 4 days. And, you know, one is community service, one is kind of like a diversity program, one is continuing orientation, takes them into the city. And we actually have 2 this year for upper class students. And the reason we have that is because of COVID, and we didn't have these programs last year. So we have a service, it's called PSIP, a service program for our sophomores, as well as SJU reads that's done by the faculty. So both of those are available to all of our transfer students too. So we're excited about that. Any other thoughts on that before I move along to the transfer mentor slide? Any other thoughts of things that people do early on? Okay, so this is my slide about the transfer mentor. So we recruit people. I send out to my list of both transfers from the, let's say it would first be fall, right? And then spring. I reach out to those students and ask if they are interested in being a transfer mentor. It's just a little bit of an application process. Why would you want to do this? What would you like to tell the transfer mentors maybe that you weren't told? We get a little bit of interesting things from this. And I mentioned already about Sam being the work study. And so this is a secret that I'll tell you, and the transfer mentors that I do the selection with, that's another tricky thing. I have a hard time when these students assert themselves for a leadership position, not selecting them. We only get, I guess I have 7 to 8 returners on average, and I try to get maybe 10 more. A group of 20 is like more than enough. So we don't go beyond 20. And so I have maybe 2 students that sit in these interviews with me, and we talk about the students. And, you know, honestly, I do not select anyone. And so that's kind of interesting with the students to do that. The reason that I would not take someone, and I've not had this yet, is someone who says, oh, my parents made me come to St. Joseph's. I really hate it here. I mean, that person I would not take. But the student who's not this really strong, terrific leader involved in everything, student who might be a little bit passive, but stepped out of their comfort zone and applied for this, I really give them a chance with it, because it's a leadership position that doesn't take a whole lot. And I've seen these students absolutely blossom once they've gotten into this role. Maybe they weren't a leader before, maybe they didn't assert themselves at their other campus. You know, as I said, the only thing I've seen, you know, that would make you say, oh, this student's not transfer mentor material, is that, you know, they're a little bit quiet, or they're not real self-assured. But selecting them has really been an interesting, I'm maybe talking about 2 or 3 students over the past couple of years, and they've really excelled in the position. So I think I'll continue that. And the students are fine with that too. You know, we talk about things generally that are very positive. You know, I really like the way she responded to the COVID question, they'll say, and things like that. And so it's, you know, we're very positive, not nitpicking on things. And as I said, if somebody said something that was alerting, we would certainly not pass that person on. But so far, so good. You know, people are not going to usually apply for these kinds of positions if that's how they feel. And then they get training, which isn't very long, a couple hours. And we give them nice golf shirts that are kind of silky shirts, and then they just have the hawk on the pocket, and that's it. So it's not like this shirt that says I'm a transfer mentor or something. And then we do see that they wear them at other times. And like I started to say, I really do empower them. I find generally they're a really strong group, And if you give them, the mentors, if you give them some authority, if you will, they really respond very well. And that's been really terrific watching them bloom, these students. Also, we'll get students, you know how it is, you get students transferring 2 days before the semester begins. How about the day the semester begins? How about 3 days into the semester? And these students will actually take them one-on-one if they're free, and spend time with the family, unpacking the car, showing them where the residence hall is, walking them around to the COVID testing location and that kind of thing. So we've really had real success with these transfer mentors. Has anybody else used students in a role like this, in a mentoring role for orientation or anything else? How about with that class? Is there any like students teaching the transfer class?
This is Tom from Delaware Valley. We have had a 1 credit class similar to what you guys were talking about earlier for a while now for freshmen. And it's 2 1 credit classes. The transfers here take the second part of that 1 credit class. On the freshman side, there has been that mentor program previously, and we're in discussions now about setting up something for transfers. I think it, goes without saying that a lot of people on this call, on this conference, whatever the freshmen are getting, I think the transfers should be as equally represented a lot of times with those resources. And I would agree, Nancy, like you're saying, if you ask a group of students, the ones are going to get excited, they're going to buy in, they're going to want to help out because they went through the process, and they're going to try to make it better. So it's a great idea really all around.
Mm-hmm.
Nancy, you had, I had brought up that we have the course, and I was actually wrong. If they actually get 4 credits for it. So
Oh, wow.
First year in transfers, the first year experience is a 4 credit course. But we do not have students involved, like, so that our mentors aren't involved in that. We do have a couple different things on our campus. We have a transfer concierge, which is a newer full-time position that we have in our registrar's office, and they work hand in hand with us, doing a lot of things that you mentioned as far as reaching out to the transfers to assist them, making sure they're getting registered for classes, all of those kinds of things. But that person also oversees 2 new transfer groups. So it's students who want to be in these organizations. And those students do assist us throughout the year on different things, but we also make sure that our tour guides have a representation of transfer students. So our student ambassadors within admissions, we have students that are on that are transfer, as well as our new student programs for orientation. They also make sure that they hire students who were also transfers, so that there is a selection of students.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. 4 credits, that's a lot. Wow. Okay. Okay, we could go to the next slide. So this year, like, let me move my slide over. This year, we're doing a combination of, well, we're definitely doing in person. We're definitely doing in person, but we'll use these slides, and this is just a silly example, but to show students who are coming in what these students are involved in. And they usually, we have a couple transfer mentors that say when they're introduced, I'm a transfer mentor and that's it, and I'm really happy about that, and that's fine. But we find that many of the other ones, like the rest of our student leaders, are in 100 different things. So we'll ask that on their slide, we're preparing these slides right now, their name, their major, their minor, and those things, what groups they're in, so that someone can say, oh, you know what, I always wanted to play club lacrosse. I'll have to run into Mary at lunchtime. So that's one of the things that came, again, from the students, saying we wish we knew what, other students were involved in these. So, and then at the bottom is like their quote, which is what they all say. You guys have to really get involved, even if it feels uncomfortable. Stick your neck out, get involved, sit down next to somebody at lunch. So this is what their slide will look like. And we have a picture of the person on the slide as well. And then this is just our, like our little breakdown for transfer orientation and what's involved with it. I'll share an icebreaker, and I hope you'll share icebreakers that you have too, especially if you have a good one. I latched onto this one and I never changed it because, you know, these students don't know, they're only here one time for the icebreaker, but we put numbers around the room. It's a very large room, like 1 to 5. And then we ask questions like all the maybe humanities majors go to the 1s, business majors go to the 2, education 3, you know, and the breakdown. All people that are, you know, second semester sophomores go to this number 1, you know, we break it down by class. We do one that's pets. All the dog owners 1, cat owners 2, cat and dog neither, you know, and then 5 odd animals and that. And then we have a leader in each group, at least 1. Usually we have more than 1. And they sort of run the discussion through. And I ask them to be sensitive to the fact that business has 50 people in it and education has 2, and I'm exaggerating. But, you know, the 2 people are sitting there waiting for those 50 to get finished. So don't ask them for like a biography of their whole life. Since this group is so large, we're just going to do names. Or since this group is so small, let's talk about, you know, what your dog's name is. And you know, how many students are coming from a community college, how many from a 4-year private institution, how many from a 4-year public institution, new to college, all to begin. So each time you get people moving through those groups, they're meeting different people that have something in common with them. Oh, I also live 3 hours away from here. Where do you live? Are you commuting to campus? Are you living off campus? Or are you living in the residence halls? That's one of the other questions. All the 1s, all the 2s, all the 3s. So that so far has been a good icebreaker for us. Anybody? I don't mean to put anybody on the spot, but if you have one, I would love for you to share that with us because I'm always looking for something else. And then we do an introduction to academic and student life at St. Joseph's. That's my PowerPoint of many, many slides. The whole program begins at 11 o'clock. Registration 10 o'clock, 10:30, but we do a hard start at 11 o'clock because we need every minute of the time that we have. And then we have that bleeding thing where people are coming in and you're not finished one thing and it's kind of awkward. So I've learned to really start at 11, even if people are not all ready and all there. So I do this whole piece about academic and student life, how to get your roster and those slides. The stuff about the shuttle, stuff about parking, all of that. And again, I found that the students want to hear from the students, surprise, surprise. So I've actually given them some of my PowerPoint and we go through it in advance, what they'll say. I said, please don't just read the PowerPoint, you know, let's talk about it. And, you know, one of the things that's great about St. Joseph's is that we're suburban and also a mile from Philadelphia. And this is what that means. And this is what you can find in Philadelphia and that kind of stuff. So they do those slides and I do more about, you know, office for students with disabilities and the various things like that. Then we have lunch and we invite the advisors to come. The students are registered by this point, but of course they have many questions and they want to change majors and all of that. The person from co-op is also invited to join us, but it's very informal. While, you know, students are eating, but they can go up to the advisors and ask questions, or sometimes the advisors do introduce themselves and say a few things that are relevant to either the college that they're in or the transfer experience. And then they say, I'll be here if you need to talk to me over lunch. Then one of the pretty cool things is that the students take them out on Find Your Classroom's campus tour. So they need their roster. They need to be able to pull that up on their phone, which they do. And then we actually take them to, you know, Mandeville 308. We have an old building here that's our original building. There's a room in there I still can't get to myself. There's only one staircase. So, and they have classes in there. It's Barbel and 265. So they take them there, you know, and we try to do this by major so that the business students are taking business mentors are taking business students around and that. But of course, along the way, it's like, and this is where I stop and eat, and this is where I study. This is always a good spot in the afternoon. No one's here. This is a good lot to park in. And that's the idea behind it. It's more than classroom tours. And then we have an off to a great start panelists, and the panelists are professional people. It's our director of student leadership and activities, campus recreation, campus ministry, Did I write this down? I'm trying to remember if I remember everybody. There were 5. Oh, Office of Diversity. And then sometimes they have like little tchotchkes to give out, and they talk to students about getting involved and certainly gear it towards transfer students. That was like one of those little things that I had to remember. I had to remember to tell them in January, each January that I've done this, that remember we do have freshmen now. Because I was thinking, while they were saying, and as a transfer student, I'm thinking, oh, geez, there's freshmen here, the very first year we did this. So I just reminded them about those freshmen that we have there in January. And then at the very end, there's a student panel. And the student panel is an agreement that, I'm not there. There's no administrators there. And the students write a question on a 3x5 card, and then the leaders answer those questions. And so it really can be anything, and it really is very meek. It's not, I guess people have said things like, do you need fake ID to have fun at the school and things like that. But I really trust our transfer mentors. I talk to them about those things. If you get questions like that, I said, you have to realize that you are a different person now. You don't feel like that, especially if you like a student who's coming in or attracted to that student. But you really need to think about, they see you as a leader. And so what does that mean? So if you were to tell someone, and I actually said these words, if you were to tell someone, you know what, to have fun on this campus, you need a fake ID. I said, you've completely changed that student's experience for the next 2 to 4 years. So you really want to think about that stuff. And I count on you, you're a leader, and, and everything's been fine. We haven't had any kind of crazy questions. They ask questions like, who should I take for a certain class that's particularly difficult, things like that. Because they tell me at the end, again, not every word, but that's the idea, that the students feel comfortable that they can ask other students questions without us being there. And then we also use some of our transfer mentors for the parent portion of orientation, which is next. That's the next slide. So what we found was that we would get some students maybe from New England or Northern New Jersey, like too far. Parents wanted to come with the student, too far for the parents to go home. And so this was really created out of that. It was really to give them something to do while they kind of hung out here. And so somebody in our student success office at the beginning at 11 does tips for a successful transition on a PowerPoint. And then there's these things we call commercial breaks, little pieces of information there about those important offices for transfer students. They do get a lunch that we buy for them. One thing that's very important for this group is coffee all day. That's a very important thing, we were told. They need to have coffee in the morning, noon, and afternoon. So I have Aramark change that out the 3 different times. And then the administrators panel is like campus safety and I meant to say residence life. Residence life is very important. They get a lot of questions. And so that's who's on that panel, as well as student activities, diversity office. But the people that get the most questions are like financial aid and residence life, as you would imagine. So we never let them off the hook. If they're not going to be here that day, we ask them to get someone else. And then we have the transfer student mentor panel. So we take 3 of the mentors that aren't doing the last part of the panel that I mentioned before and bring them into this panel. And they just introduce themselves, what they're involved in, maybe what their experience has been like, because they're usually pretty passionate about it. And then the parents can ask them questions, which they do. And that's kind of fun. But a different person completely does this parent orientation, because obviously I can't do this and the student orientation at the same time. It's someone else from the student success office. Then they get a campus tour if they want. Some people don't want to. Many transfers don't bring parents. That's fine. It's interesting. If we have like 70 students registered for orientation, we'll also have 70 parents. And that's because one student's bringing 2, one student's bringing 1, and one student's bringing none. So it just kind of always works out to be about the same number as students that we have. And then at the end at 3 o'clock, they reconnect with students. Sometimes they have short flights that they're actually jumping onto. Okay, so that's it for anybody have any thoughts or questions about that? Parent? Okay, and then I just wanted to show you what we give the transfer, what I give, I'll say, the transfer students, that's really university-wide this very beginning. I started to update it. That's why I put September with a question mark, because I updated it, but some of these things have not been decided yet. The red items are things that are only for transfers. But what we're trying to do is integrate them with the other things that are available for everyone. So it's this comprehensive listing of all the things that are happening in the next like 10 days. And as I said, I didn't change all these dates. Like our first day of classes is actually Monday, August 23rd this year. So this is from a different year. So this is what it looks like for their, that was their orientation, which this year is the week before, which is Wednesday, August 18th, which is why I have August 18th there at the top. So from 11 to 3 is their orientation and the parent orientation. Then for the students that are staying on, they can move in to their residence hall. We also do at this time dinner with current transfer mentors again that are interested and available. There's a landmark that we have here on campus, which is similar to an Applebee's. I know some of you have landmarks. We offer the students either the student dining hall or that landmark. And honestly, they've gone to both of them. Like, I'm never sure what they're going to pick because they want comfortability with that camping and dining hall. They want to know where the trays are, where you put your dirty dishes, because it's, again, they're not freshmen, but they're not students who have been here. So they don't know these things. And so we offer them that option as well. And of course, any students who are off campus or any student leaders who are not living on campus, I pay for their meal that night. And there's been years that we go to the landmark as well. And I go with them. And sometimes I sit with them and sometimes I don't. I kind of go on a feeling. But this is actually 2 days before classes begin. And then these are the things that student leadership had available that night. So again, you're invited to all these things. The transfer mentors put together a group me, and they invite students who are transfers interested in going to the events that they personally are going to. Like, let's meet outside the chapel and then we'll walk over to Blewett together. That's the idea behind that. So I kind of work with them on that. Who's going to what event? Can we put out a group me and get other students to go with you? Because we do have some students who are not, fitting in, don't feel comfortable, maybe aren't the easiest at making friends. And so bringing them into the transfer mentor group is helpful, we found. And even another little piece of that is not telling them like just meet at Blewett. We usually tell them to meet where you registered for orientation, even if that's like out of the way of the mentor or out of the way of the program, because they're familiar with that. They already went there. You already went to the Campion North Lounge. So let's meet there again and we'll walk down to Blewett together. That's the idea. And then the next slide is just more of this. I just kind of wanted to show you what this looks like. There's really only one piece here. The Sunday is the day before classes begin. There's a barbecue here and they run shuttles and things. The advising centers are open. So this is open to everyone. But then for the President's Barbecue, the transfers meet up together from the group me and then they sit together. And I'm not here for any of that part of it. But they usually fill me in on how it went, and students feel usually pretty good about that experience, that connecting in, feeling more a part of things, asking questions of their, other transfer students who are already here. And then the last one is just, okay, so this is, again, no, next slide, please. Yeah. Okay, so first day of classes is Monday. Then there's department meetings, and then we will take them to a Phillies game. I'm not sure of the date yet. And I do sync that with the student leadership game. I've already talked to them about that, because then I could just grab some of their tickets, like they buy extra, and then I just do a budget transfer for that, as well as they get a 4th bus. And so rather than me do all that work, Megan does all that work, and then I just, piggyback on her program. That works out really well. We can't even take all the students that want to go to that, as well as all the leaders that want to go. So I always tell the leaders, like, it's the first 2 or 4 that sign up. And I don't go on that trip with them, and they just communicate with me on text, and it's, so far, everything's been fine. So that's what that looks like. And then how about, does anyone have a requirement or anything about where transfers live? Or do you have transfers on campus, off campus, and commuting as well? Is that pretty much standard for everyone? So some students might know someone already at the university and then they jump on with them as a roommate. The thing that we found works really well for transfer retention, I'm always pushing this with residence life. They hear me, you know, starting on this, they're like, here we go. But we had a little building. Our residence halls are all different. We have some, you know, traditional ones and new ones, old ones, suite style, little houses and all that. Well, one year we recently had a house for transfers, and they didn't all live there. They lived in different places, but I think like 18 of them lived in this house. And that became known on campus as a transfer house. It was really fun. It was really fun that they could say, we're going to meet up at the transfer house and then go to dinner or go to the event or whatever. So I'm always pushing that. And so this year that became the student health building. So we weren't able to have that. So then we were supposed to have a floor of a residence hall, but then because we needed quarantine space and isolation space, we even lost that. So I was told by Residence Life, she mentioned it at a director's meeting and looked at me and said, we're going to move back to having transfer housing this year. I'm like, yes, 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 because they really love that. Even the students that don't live there go there, the mentors and all. So that's a fun thing. And hopefully we'll have a good space. I always say to the mentors, it might not be the best space, but we'll make it a good space. We'll make it our space. And they're like, okay, you know, like, okay, we'll do this. And then this is, if you're aware of the National Student Transfer Appreciation Week. We started this a few years ago, doing a program. This is this year's dates. I just looked up the slide and put it on here. We will at least do one event where we'll do some giveaways like Heart transfers, you know, SJU Heart transfer students. We did Frisbees one year. We try to have something to give out. Coincides with, you know, Halloween and October. So we'll do something with a lunch. Yeah, because of COVID, we had to do it in the tent last year outside. And of course it rained that day. So it was fine. We actually had the hawk there. We got some pictures, which was good because we could put them on our website. And what's interesting is I worked with the person in admissions operations to come up with all the current transfer students that are here and invite them. And that's been really fun. I will tell you, there's hundreds and hundreds of transfer students. So when I tell Aramark that, they like have a heart attack. But you know what? You don't get more than 50. And that's like, at least for us, that's a good year where we got 50. People feel good about it though, because they were invited. And then what we found where there were cohorts like sitting together. Oh, we were, you know, and so here's the group that transferred in 2 years ago. Here's the group that transferred in last year. And the admissions people that I mentioned before are invited to this. And they come and you know, they talk about opportunities for transfer students, like they have a position for a transfer ambassador. And we keep them in mind for other things. So we encourage them to come to this. The next slide, I believe, is our, yeah, this is what our narrative was about the transfer lunch, that, you know, this is what we sent to all the students and asked them to RSVP for this. And again, it was lots and lots of students, and we don't get that many who are available to come. Usually we try to do it during the free period, so it's a better time than another. And that's what that looked like. And then the next one is the picture that we had of last year. And obviously it's distorted a little bit because I had to fit it to the slide. But that's our tent. So then there's an interesting question, like once our transfer students integrate, is there really a need for a transfer group? So I had a student that came here as a lacrosse player on varsity, and he actually signed up as a transfer mentor, and then he kind of wasn't involved, and I wasn't hearing from him when I would write to the group. And then he said to me, you know what, this is really not my thing. I'm really in with the athletes and I love it here, and that's my group. So it makes you think, like, you know, unlike the commuters, unlike the first gen students, sometimes this group integrates and there's really not a need for the group. And the next thing I would love to work on is transfer retention statistics, because I really think our numbers are good, and I would like to share that with the admissions office so that they could share that out. Our students, the mentors are ending up in fabulous places. Kellogg's leadership program. I have a student that said he got into law school. I said, oh, where? He said, Penn. I'm like, good for you, you know? So it seems to be a good experience. So I want to try to look at retention. He said, oh, Nancy, I don't know about that. This is going to be hard with these students coming in at different times. I said, yeah, let's just give it some thought, you know, 2 years out, 4 years out, 6 years out, how far we can go and see how many of these students, you know, are able to retain. Some of the students I find, I'll be interested to hear your experiences with this, come here with problems, personal problems, and I'm not sure the problem's addressed. And so they just transfer here and like the problem's supposed to magically go away and it doesn't. And then the problem manifests itself here too. Student might have to drop out here as well. Anybody have experience with that? Because that's sometimes what I find. And I'll talk to the student and they'll say, honestly, they'll say, this has been such a good experience. It's not this, it's just that I need a timeout. I shouldn't have started this soon. You know, I had to get some things worked out at home or whatever before I started school. So that's one concern I have about the numbers that might, you know, make it a little bit skewed. But anyway, I think that's the last slide, right? And I just thought we would open it up if people have thoughts, questions, feedback.
Hi, Nancy. This is Sandra from Community College of Philadelphia. Thank you so much for the presentation. This is great information. I have a couple questions specifically about the population you're serving. I know that you originally mentioned transfers, first generation commuting students, etc. Are we talking about your traditional day population students, or does this also include the non-traditional degree, you know, the Hub degree completion program, the professional liberal studies program students? Like, in other words,
Right.
do you take all of your students together, or do you separate them by how they have been matriculated to the college or to your university?
Yes, it is separated, right? So PLS and HTC, as you mentioned, are in the adult programs. And they do have a different orientation and a different set of people that they work with in terms of advising and that kind of thing. But as I said, we do find that we have some, you know, older transfer students that need to go through the traditional experience because their goal is med school or law school, and they have to have the day program. So they might take some night classes, but they need the labs and the organic chems and those things that happen during the day. So the students are not as traditional as, say, our freshman orientation when we get, you know, 1,000 18-year-olds. And I think this year, 19-year-olds. But it's a little bit more diverse than that, but not, but I know what you mean with the PLS and HTC. That's a totally different program. And actually, interestingly enough, that's what I was responsible before I came to this program that I've been in for 3 years now. I worked with the graduate programs and the undergraduate adult students.
Would you say that most of your students, because it's the traditional day program, that they're transferring from other four-year schools, or is it equivalent, like, is it half and half community colleges, or?
Yeah, it's a mix. It's definitely a mix. And some large state institutions and some, you know, not some small private schools. What's interesting though, every student, I always say this to our admissions people, every single student, when you say, why did you transfer? The very first thing they say, that every single one says, I wanted to be closer to home. It's so fun. And then they get into a million other reasons they transferred here. But the very first thing is, I thought I was a big shot heading off to California. I thought I'd make it at, you know, Georgetown. I thought that University of Connecticut wasn't that far away. And then I realized I need to be closer to home. I miss my family. That's the very first thing they all say. Honestly, everyone, including the mentors, they say that too. But then there's lots of other reasons too, as I said. So that's always something to keep in mind. I think that, you know, sometimes we lose students and we find that they felt too far from home too.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions?
I've got one, Nancy. So it sounds like you guys have your act together there at St. Joe's pretty well as far as the transitional piece. Like once admissions is done with them, you know, that transitions well to the main part of campus. Do you know if, you know, you guys, once they're doing orientation, the thing that I keep finding happens with our student populations are our emails, just as an example, are kind of set up more to geared towards the freshmen. So all of our transfer students are getting emails that say, welcome class of 2025.
Oh, yeah.
Class.
Mhm.
Are you guys able to distinguish that? Are the transfers getting separate kind of messaging so they're not, one, confused, two, upset? And to me, like whenever I ask, like I just had a group of transfers on campus today for Transfer Tuesday, and all of them raised their hand right away. They're like, they're not real happy about it because they want to say, wait a second, I'm not 2025, I'm 2024, 2023.
Right,
You know,
right.
why don't you say that in the emails, or, you know, welcome us in that kind of tone? So
Mhm.
you guys have a way of dealing with that?
Well, you know, it's funny when you say that because when the big freshman orientation had to go online last year, they wanted to do, you know, a Zoom, and they wanted to do virtual, and they wanted it to be very interactive. And then, as I said, we kept saying, well, we're a small group, so we're going to be on campus, right? And then they last minute said, no, you can't be. And there was a quarantining issue in the fall. Like they would have had to quarantine 2 weeks sooner. And since they didn't, now you have to have it online. So the thought was from, you know, in IT, we'll just use the slides that we use, the same program that we use for. And as soon as I looked at it, I was like, there's no way we can use this. It says class of 2024, every slide, everything is oriented, you know, as, you know, coming out of high school, it's a different experience than college. And I'm like, no, that's going to. So I think one thing that might make it different, I'm not sure, is that like I have the transfers, but I don't have any of that other stuff. I don't have like the freshman orientation at all, that somebody else completely does freshman orientation. I don't have anything to do with that. And she has nothing to do with me. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean, like we both sit on panels and stuff like that. But as far as the orchestration or the lunch or who's doing what, they don't even probably know the date for transfer orientation yet, but she's all over the first year one, you know. So probably because of that, you know, it's like kind of my thing. And so I am very sensitive to that though. Yeah, for sure. And, you know, the people that work with the transfer population, I believe also are recruiting for PLS and HDC populations. They only work with transfer students. So their orientation is transfer oriented. They're not working with incoming freshmen. So it's just a natural separation here, I think, is the difference. But I could see where that would. I definitely see where that would.
I'm curious, just to kind of piggyback on that. So Nancy, would you say that in your computer system or in your enrollment system, students are coded separately? They're coded as transfers versus coded as first year students?
Absolutely. Yeah. Right. So that's what makes my life a lot easier with like Cognos, because I can pull those reports. I can use whatever attributes I want, like all freshmen, first gen, or all first gen, or all transfers, or, you know, all transfers that are registered, you know, inactive transfers, whatever, to be able to pull that. So we have pretty much everything. The only tricky thing for us is commuters, but everything else has an attribute, including first gen, thank goodness. But yeah, so, but commuters is always, the reason commuters are challenging is because a commuter that commutes from home as a freshman is very different than a student who lives in Manayunk, yet it looks as though they're both commuters. Meanwhile, the commuter that's in Manayunk had 2 years of a residential experience as a freshman and a sophomore. So they're not the group I'm looking for. I'm looking for these disconnected kids that, you know, and I say kids, I shouldn't say that, but disconnected people that don't know anything, don't know how to get their ID or any other way. Yeah, so
Yeah,
everything else.
I'm sorry.
No.
Tom, I would ask if your students are coded differently, and if they are, then just making sure that that's drilled into people, you know, that before you send any communication, it really needs to be based on whatever the computer code is.
Yeah, we code them. They do separate applications. I mean, I certainly treat them differently, you know, because I get to work with 3/4 of the incoming transfer population.
Mhm.
I think just in admissions, our email chains are set up more generic. Hey, welcome to Del Val. They're all signed by the director, and just the messaging is all 2025 or 20, you know,
Mhm.
whatever. It just keeps ticking up. So it's great to hear. Obviously, St. Joe's is larger. We don't really have this incoming like Nancy's type of position at Del Val, and we certainly don't have it broken into someone who just works with freshmen, someone who just works with transfers. So orientations are for both. It's for everybody. They definitely have more of a freshman feel. And I
Mhm.
would love to change it all. It's just, you know, you can only yell on your soapbox so often. So
It's true.
it's
Yeah.
great to hear that. And I'm sure if everyone on this, all 22 that are on this right now have similar, you know, problems at their schools, it's the same thing.
I would say that at Widener University, we in our CRM system, we're able to streamline communication. So they're coded, and then we are able to send different communications. So freshmen get communication for freshmen, and then transfers get communication for transfers. Now, usually what we try and do, we don't want transfer students to feel too disconnected, right? Because we want to make sure that they're part of Widener. We want to make sure that they feel welcome. So what we're trying to do most of the time, we're trying to mirror communications that are going out to freshmen, but just kind of edit them so that they fit for transfers. And then as soon as they're admitted, you know, freshmen get directed to the choose.widener, which is a freshman specific, admitted what next type of website. Transfers don't really get that. So, I mean, of course they can go on the website and they can find it. But I think that they very soon, once if they find it on their own other website, they very soon find out that that's more freshman specific, because they are seeing that, you know, welcome class of 2020 something, right? Messaging out there. So we're trying to keep that separate as much as possible. Orientation is also different, right? So they get different messages. Now, it's really on me as the transfer coordinator to differentiate between the freshman population and the transfer population as far as orientation, because sometimes if a student comes in with less than 24 credits, we're not going to put them in the transfer orientation that has people coming in with 60 credits, right?
Mhm.
So maybe for them, it's more suitable to partake in the regular freshman orientation, because they theoretically are freshmen. They just have a few transfer credits. So we kind of have to go through them and kind of, you know, pick and choose. Like if they're coming in with less credits, then they're gonna attend the freshman orientation. But generally speaking, you know, because we're a fairly small school, our transfer population is not that large. It's kind of easy. It's fairly easy to go ahead and do that. But I would have to work very, very closely with the student affairs, right? Because they're the ones who are planning orientation. So every year, every intake, spring and fall, we get together and we talk about orientation, and we want to make sure that, you know, these groups are taken care of. Now, I don't partake in the freshman orientation, but I want to make sure that, you know, who's a transfer student that needs to go there is going there, gets the necessary information, and who's a transfer gets the necessary information. So it's all, I think it all starts with a CRM, right? You want to make sure that your CRM has that capability to distinguish between the messaging that's going out to these two groups. I guess it's the same with international students when you think about it. You know, we're not talking about international students, but they're a different group as well. So it's kind of the same with that population as well.
Well, and I'm just curious, I mean, I don't want to manipulate this, but since no one else does, I'm curious if you guys have started, and this is for Nancy or anyone else, have you started to accept a significant number of dual enrollment students, and whether that population is, because they're not quite freshmen, they're not quite transfers,
Mhm.
where CCP is starting to graduate students with both an associate's degree and a high school diploma at the same time. Although there's a bunch of dual enrollment students who don't ever complete an associate degree. So I'm curious if you have had enough students yet, and whether they are guided through a different process.
Well, we haven't had a lot of those students, but they go through the freshman experience because it's such a residential based campus and that's such a different experience for them. And again, honestly, and I say this to them over and over again, I'm here for your success. Like, we're here. So whatever will make you the most successful is something that and this is a really important part of it.
Sandra, you probably already know this, but for Westchester, that number does continue to grow. And I know we've talked about it. But we are, as part of the state system, we have very strict definitions of how we define what is a first year, what is a transfer. And it's based on high school graduation. So even if that dual enrollment student is coming to us with an associate's degree completed, they are being treated as a first year student because they just graduated high school. So they're going to get the full first year experience. They're still going to get all their college credits, and they're still going to get all the benefits of the program to program agreement between the state community colleges and the state schools. They're still going to get all of that, but we are going to treat them fully as first year students coming to us directly from high school.
I think what's interesting is not that they're going through the admissions process as freshmen, or that they're, if they want to live on campus, of course, the introduction to the residential experience. But I'm curious if as the numbers grow, and I really don't know the answer to this, but I'm curious if as the numbers grow, especially for those students who complete both an associate degree and a high school diploma at the same time, whether that's going to be enough of a group to just kind of put to the side and say, not for the whole orientation, but just for a small, I don't know, like a small session where they're talking about the unique aspects of it. Because yes, you're right. I think those students are students who want to have that freshman experience, but at the same time, they may need slightly different supports for academics or other things. So I'm just curious what will happen to that population in the future.
Mm-hmm.
I know that at Widener, they work very, very closely with the program advisors. So, they do get the freshman experience like they do at Westchester, but and they come in from admission purposes, they come in as freshmen, right? But they do get their credits, of course. And we are hesitant of putting them in as juniors because they don't have that college experience. We want to make sure that they get that, right? And they work one-on-one with the advisor. So every transfer student coming in is paired with an advisor, and our advisors are, the professors who are teaching the courses. So they're working very closely with them. So I don't know. I'm trying to think. It's a good point that you're making, Sandra. That maybe these students do need to have a little bit more support, academic support from that perspective, right? Because they are coming with such a large number of credits. But like put in a group, and then just kind of like, have them all kind of go through. But I think what's going to make that difficult is that these students are coming to such different programs, right? So it's not like they're all coming in with the same dual degree credits, and it's not like they're all coming into the same program. They're all going different ways. So that's what might make it a little difficult. And I think that the fact that they're going through the freshman experience might cover part of that, right? Because they feel like they're freshmen, but at the same time, they know that they're going to graduate a little earlier. So it's a very interesting point, but I don't, what I'm trying to get to is that I don't know how we could best address that, honestly, just because there's so many different things that we would have to take into consideration for this group.
I think in my mind, I'm thinking one of the main important things is for any orientation program to make sure that all of those things are touched upon so that all students know where the support services are. Because I don't necessarily think the supports are going to be different. The support, the offices aren't going to change. The staff members aren't going to change. What they offer isn't going to change. But just making sure that all the students, regardless of their background, that they all know what is available to them on each of our campuses. So they know where to go to get any help that they might need, and that it is available to all students with all different backgrounds.
Yeah, great point.
Any other questions? Comments? Okay. Well, on behalf of
Whenever you get your data, I would love to talk to you about it.
Yeah, thanks, for sure.
On behalf of TAAC, I want to thank Dr. Nancy Komada for this presentation and for joining us today. And we thank all of our participants for attending, and we hope you enjoyed this session, and hopefully will be joining us for some of our other sessions as well.
Thanks so much.
Have a great day, everyone.
You too. Have a good one.